All right, guys, how's everybody doing? Eddie Rockensock here with Team Rockensock. On my left, my right-hand guy on my left. There you go.
Ian Isbell, Team Rockensock, Benchmark Realty.
So we're here today. We wanted to bring you a little video talking about the lawsuit that has happened between DOJ and NAR, which is the National Association of Realtors, and what that settlement is going to change in our market. It's not going to change a lot, but we just want to talk about the impact of it and then what it means to the consumer, the buyer or seller. So basic facts of the settlement was it was announced March 15th. The original settlement was for $418 million, and then some rule changes inside our MLSs, our multiple listing services. It's supposed to happen about 120 days after the settlement was announced, and the actual changes are happening on our MLS as of August 17th. All current realtors are covered, so we are not a party to the settlement. It is just the brokerages that are a part of those settlements.
Yeah, when you talk about the brokerages, there's kind of a $2 billion annual cap in 2022. So anybody that exceeded that is not included in the coverage on the lawsuit, which there's some players in the market, some larger brokerages that were not covered in that. And we'll kind of get to that in a little bit as we go through here.
So if their sales were over $2 billion, they needed to settle the lawsuit outside of this settlement.
Correct. So it's not going to be a blanket for them as well.
Yeah.
So next we wanted to kind of confront the falsehoods. If you're like everyone else that I talk to about this lawsuit, as I'm delivering information on this to clients and other people in the community, if you're watching the news, you're not getting the right information. Some of it's possibly true, but a lot of it's not. So we want to confront some of those falsehoods and try to cover a little bit of those with you. The first one is that the proposed settlement forces brokers to reduce compensation. That is false. This is not going to require compensation to decrease amongst agents. The settlement doesn't establish a standard, nor does it even mention anywhere that agents what they should or may charge. Like all things in real estate, this has always been negotiable and will continue to always be negotiable, that compensation for that selling and buying agent.
Yep. There is never has been and never will be, according to this, a standard commission charged. Everybody needs to know that.
Correct. Falsehood number 2, the proposed settlement will, for the first time, allow sellers to no longer pay compensation to agents bringing the buyer. That is false as well. That has never been a requirement as long as I've been selling real estate. That has never been a requirement and will not be a requirement moving forward. Years ago, the RealTrax or the MLS system required you put something in the buyer broker field, but that was reduced to $1 several years back. So there is this proposal, like I said, it's never been a responsibility for the seller to pay a buyer's commission. And if you want to speak a little bit to that.
I don't know if I have a lot to speak to that. It's all this is saying.
Pretty much cut and dry.
Yep,
Yeah.
it's always been negotiable.
Yeah, always been negotiable.
Yeah.
So the next one is the proposed settlement will serve to lower prices and make homeownership affordable again. That's definitely false. This settlement has nothing to do with the prices of homes or the real estate market in its entirety. It's strictly just based on transparency and commissions. So values in real estate, like all things in sales, what drives that price is supply and demand. This lawsuit is in no way, shape, or going to change the property values, if you will.
Yeah.
So you're not getting huge discounts just because there was a lawsuit come out here.
Well, and if you think about it, even if there's, let's just say, a 1% compression in that. It takes a $500,000 house and it makes it $495,000. So the biggest thing that it will do is it'll affect some comps, right? Some that offer and some that don't. But I think the biggest thing that people need to know is we can get into all the nitty gritty in there, but everything's negotiable, and it will all be negotiated on the front end. That's the important part.
In the contract, no guaranteed. If I show up with my buyer, you're going to give me 3%.
That's right.
Or anything like that.
That's right.
So the proposed settlement, the next falsehood, the proposed settlement will result in significant restitution to consumers who were harmed over recent years in their transactions by realtors. This is false as well. You heard that large number, that $418 million. That's what NAR put out. The total so far, $684 million. And I was floored to find out this fact. But Eddie, tell them where the majority of that money's headed.
Yeah, majority of that money is going to the attorneys. And not to get too political with any of this stuff, but let's just say, the people that were proposed harmed with not being able to negotiate their compensation with their agent, they might get $10 at the end of this thing, where the attorneys, that looks like probably over about $200 million in attorney fees with this. So I don't want to say they're sticking their heads where it shouldn't be, but there's definitely winners and losers, and most of the time it's not the realtors, it's not the consumers, it's going to be those attorneys. Maybe I shouldn't say that.
I'm cool with it. I think it's the truth. So summary of truths as we go into this. Like I said, there's a lot of kind of gray area in this. In reality, there's really not. It's pretty straightforward. Everything's always been negotiable. But offers of buyer representation and compensation by the listing agent will be prohibited anywhere in the association-owned MLS. Does that mean you can't offer compensation to a buyer's agent? Absolutely not. All this means is that you can no longer offer it on the MLS, so the multiple listing service. So when you get your RealTrack slide for us, when you get that, you're no longer going to see a
buyer compensation.
Buyer compensation. Thank you.
So
you're no longer going to see that on the listing agreement with a specified amount in that box.
That was one of the significant rules that the settlement said, is nowhere on any MLS can there be compensation offered. It also cannot be syndicated to anything. So anything that is MLS owned, you will be fined, pretty stiff fines too. So.
Yep. And correct me if I'm wrong here, Eddie, but you can still advertise those on your personal websites.
Personal. Yep. And nothing that's syndicated out. It can only be a personal website.
Only on the personal website.
Yep.
So, and again, doesn't mean you can't offer it. You just can't advertise it on the front end through the MLS system. So buyer's agent commission can be paid in one of these three ways. One, by the consumer. So the buyer directly pays their agent. Two, through a seller's concessions. And how the concessions field is a new one added to the MLS recently, that a seller can put concessions in there, but that cannot specifically state that it is for commission. That concession is a concession for the buyer to use for their transaction how they see fit. And a big portion of that closing cost is going to be to the buyer's agent. So what you use that concessions for is really up to you as a buyer.
Yeah. And then all of that is negotiated into the contract. So
Correct.
There's it's completely transparent all the way around.
Correct. Buyer's representation agreements will be mandatory. That is one of the changes that's taking effect August 17th. Meaning, if you are a buyer out there, if you are going to tour a home with a real estate professional, there has to be an agreement signed between you and that real estate professional. Eddie, talk a little bit about what that looks like. Do I have to, if I meet an agent, do I have to immediately sign a 6-month agreement with them to look at houses, or is there a one?
Yeah, I think this is the biggest issue that a lot of agents are having, is they don't understand. Not that they don't understand. It's a hard conversation to have. So there is a touring agreement or a buyer's representation agreement. The buyer's representation agreement just lays out what the buyer's agent or representative can do for the client or for a consumer. So a consumer is not a client. A consumer is just anybody that we know that we want to show this to. It spells out my responsibilities as a realtor to them. A client is somebody that has signed an agreement for me to represent them, for the realtor to represent them. And so they work on their best behalf. They have a fiduciary duty to the client, not to the consumer. So the challenging thing here is if you've never met your realtor and you're meeting for the very first time at a property, before they're allowed to let you in, they have to have some kind of touring agreement per this settlement that says you give them permission to work on your behalf for that house. It can be a one-time touring agreement. It can be for that house specific, but they have to have that touring agreement or a buyer's rep before they show the house.
Correct. So that means you're no longer going to be able to just call your friend up and go look at this house. You got to have that agreement signed. That is going to be legally mandatory across the nation. So I mean, that has to be in place, which we think is going to be, I think it's going to be value add. There's always been a buyer broker agreement out there. It's whether the agents were using it or not. Just like a listing agreement, you have that listing agreement to keep that listing and advertise it for a certain period of time. When that expires, it expires, or it can be mutually exited. So I think that it's important to know that when you're signing that document as a buyer, know what you're signing. Make sure that that's expressed to you and clearly gone through with you.
And I think the important part for the consumer, I'll speak for you guys for a second, not for the realtor, is interviewing those realtors beforehand, seeing who's going to provide you the most value, and not just, I don't want to say this bad thing, just don't pick up the phone and just pick whoever shows up at the top of Google or whatever. Maybe pick the top of Google. Maybe they've got the best reviews or something like that. But interview your realtors before you start there so that you can get, I think it's going to be important for realtors to be able to show you what their value is, right? Everybody knows in every profession, people are not created equally, right? We've got okay realtors and really good realtors and great realtors. We've got okay doctors and really good ones and great ones. And so making sure that that the agent can show you their value and that you can get that value from them.
Agreed. So next we're going to go through some changes required by the proposed settlement. Some of this we've already hit, but we do want to highlight them because it is, like we said, very important, and there is a lot of false news out there. So we want to make sure that you're very educated on this as you move forward into your transactions. So one of the first ones is shared compensation will be banned from specific mention anywhere in the MLS. That includes the private remarks. So you may not know this. You may know this. When you list your house, there's public remarks and private remarks. Only the realtors can see the private remarks. You can't tag a line in there saying we'll offer X amount in concessions or commissions for buyer's agent. We went through the funny little thing of you can't have pillows on the couches with the 3 on it, or they had all kinds of crazy things.
Flowers in the flowers beds that say 3 and all kinds of good stuff.
So you can't have anywhere on there that implies that implies you're paying out a buyer broker compensation. The shared compensation field, obviously, removed from RealTracs effective August 17th.
Yep.
Buyer representation agreements will be mandatory and kept on file with all the offices that we just kind of discussed. Buyer representation agreements must be predated from the offer and contract, meaning you can't no longer get a property under contract, then backdate a buyer agreement saying that I was they were under my leadership, if you will, throughout this portion of the transaction. No more of that. So,
and what we've heard is the MLS is really going to, the MLS is the one required to govern this, and so they will be auditing files, contracts, start to finish, to check that out. And it sounds like that they're going to be pretty diligent about that. That's one of the main things. Yeah.
At this point, they're scared. They kind of have to be diligent on it.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
The next one is some sort of written agreement must be executed before doing a home tour. So that means if it's the one-time showing agreement, the touring agreement, the buyer representation agreement, we talk about, Eddie and I work majority off of referrals. So most of our database, they're willing to sign a buyer agreement that day. Like they know they're looking for a house, they know where their guy. And we hope all of you are like that. But when it comes to that agreement, you can do a one-time touring agreement per house. So keep that in mind. Buyer representation agreement cannot be open-ended. Here to talk on that.
Yep. It has to be a contract. So you have to start date and have to have an end date. It cannot be open-ended. And also the compensation field in there cannot be open-ended. It can't be whatever the seller offers, because once again, we don't know if the sellers are offering anything. So it has to be a legally binding contract that has a start date and an end date.
Yep. All TAR forms will need to be revised to accommodate these changes. So if you're already under, let's say, Eddie, let's talk about this for people. Let's say I've got my house listed currently. What does that change for me?
So it doesn't change anything if you've already agreed to whatever you wanted to agree to, right? Whatever the contract already says. If you do want to make a change to it, you have to do an amendment to either the listing agreement or to the buyers, which brings up another good point is all of these amendments can be, all of the contracts can be amended. So that's the important part.
So if I'm a buyer right now, Eddie, and I have been represented by a real estate agent, do I have to sign a new buyer broker compensation form, or do I have to do touring agreements at this point? Let's say I've already looked at 50 houses with my agent.
Yeah. So if you already have an agency status, so which is what that buyer representation does, you do not have to sign anything new. That continues. That's the right. If you haven't had that, if you have an agent that is, so that if you have an agent, you are still, and you haven't signed anything, you are still just a customer, and they are not supposed to work on your, they are supposed to work on your behalf. Reasonable skill and knowledge, and there's a few things that you do different for a customer that you do for a client, right? They don't have a fiduciary duty to you. So if you have been seeing houses with an agent and you do not have a buyer rep, you are still just a customer, and they cannot negotiate on your behalf until you have a touring agreement and or a buyer rep agreement.
So that means if you're out there currently and you're looking at houses and your agent's not made you sign anything, come August 17th, when they do ask you to sign something, don't be freaked out. They should have had that in place already. But if they don't be freaked out. It's now customary and going to be required. I guess it's always been customary to have one, but it's going to be required now starting August 17th that be signed before you even tour homes. I think that's the big question mark. People are like, well, I signed one of those, but it was after I was under contract. Well, now it's when you go to tour a home, you can't even step foot in a home without having that agreement signed. One of the two, the touring agreement or the buyer broker agreement. So Eddie, we've talked through quite a few of these slides. Something we don't have here that I think is very important. If I'm a buyer and I'm walking into the market for the first time and I'm like, hey, what does this mean for me? Like I'm looking to buy a house. I've saved up my down payment or what down payment I think I need. I've saved up my closing costs because I've heard that that's a thing. Now I owe a realtor 3% as well.
Or 2% or 1% or
whatever the percentage is. Flat fee. I think we're going to see a lot of flat fee brokerages come out of this. A lot of for XYZ, you charge this much. I think you're going to see some of that, but I think the true pros are going to shine through this. So what does it look like if I'm a buyer and I'm coming into the market? What do I need to be prepared for when I'm meeting with my agent and when I'm go to sign that agreement? Tell me what that looks like.
So what I think the great agents will do is sit you down and have a buyer presentation, just like most listing agents have a listing presentation for when they sell the house, and go through that buyer presentation and show you all the options. The good thing about this, it's always been this way, it's just a little bit more transparent, is you have control now. So you will be able to see this is what they're offering, this is not what they're offering, this is what the agent expects to get paid. So let's just say that you're a prospective buyer with me, and we sit down and I do my buyer's presentation and I show you, here is my value, here is this buyer rep. This allows me to have you as a client, not a customer, and I work now on your behalf. I'm able to represent you, and I have a fiduciary duty to you that your needs are more than mine. Let's just say we have an agreement that I get paid $10 What happens is now we start looking at houses. This one's offering $4. Hey, I'm going to come to you and I'm going to say, hey, they're only offering $4. Here's what the value of the house is. Here's what this looks like. If this doesn't work for you, let's try to negotiate it into the contract, right? If it does work for you, I'm going to come to you and ask you for my additional $6. Once again, this could be $10, it could be $10 million. It's whatever is, but it's the important part is the buyer's agent and the buyer make that agreement. And then we try to negotiate as much as we can or as little as we can or whatever works with the listing agent and or sellers.
Yeah, I think it's important to know kind of what Eddie said there is if you and I have an agreement, like he said, for $10 is what I'm going to charge. I like you using that. That makes a lot more sense. The $10 range, the seller, like we said, can still offer concessions for you to use as you please. So what you use those concessions for is up to you. So if they're offering $14 in concessions, you can essentially pay your agent the 10 you agreed to pay them through those concessions, and then have another 4 to help cover closing costs. So I think that's important to know, and your agent's going to walk you through that. If you're with us, we're obviously going to walk you through that. So big important things. Anything else to add as far as that? If you were talking to a buyer, kind of what that looks like. Who's nervous? Like you want me to pay you what? This is what we charge. So I think that's a big conversation, and all your good agents are going to be able to explain that value and how they add that value to your transaction. If you haven't seen our other videos we've got out there, look at those. We talk about unrepresented buyers and the statistics on those. It's scary.
And I know we've talked a lot about the buyers. Here's the good news is if you have that seasoned agent or you have an experienced agent, most agents out there, they're going to be able to walk you through that so that you understand any of that. I think some of these lawsuits, what has changed is buyer's agents weren't going through all the scenarios there. The other part of it that I think is kind of interesting is still the seller part of it, right? I don't want to offer to pay a buyer's agent, or I don't want to do that. Well, there's consequences to those, right? So what happens if this buyer comes along, loves the house, has the money saved up, but doesn't have that, and you don't want to offer that compensation? Maybe that buyer can now not afford that house. You're maybe limiting your buyer pool a little bit. And so to know that everything's going to be negotiated. For example, the buyer has always brought the money in the first place, right? It's just the way that it comes out. So now it's just going to be a little bit more transparent on where it comes from and how it's negotiated. And everything will be negotiated into the contract, not on separate forms.
Very true. We've covered a lot there. Do want to just kind of once again hit some of these highlights for things that can and can't be done in a transaction. That way, if you're talking to your realtor and you're like, hey, I want to put this on the MLS, like we said, you can't. So when it comes to representing sellers, you can't enter into the MLS any offer to pay a broker's compensation. So keep that in mind, and you can't mutually offer to share compensation on an MLS, meaning if you're a listing agent and you say, I'm going to charge $6, but I'm going to pay $3 out here. Can't do that. Can't do that on the MLS. Yep. You can, as an agent representing a seller, can continue to negotiate with clients, offer compensation on your website for your listing, negotiate in the deal that commission base, and enter in a deal points in the MLS. As an example, seller willing to offer X in closing costs. Seller invites purchase offer, request closing cost payments. So different wordings. Like we said, you just can't explicitly offer or hint to offering a specific amount of compensation to a buyer broker for pay.
That's right. So what is probably going to happen is a lot of buyers agents are going to call that seller and say, are you offering any compensation, right? And then you can go back to your buyers and say, hey, they are offering this. So now this house looks better, looks worse. Point is, you probably heard us say the same thing on this quite a bit. Everything's going to be negotiated into the contract.
And all things are negotiated.
Yep.
So as far as representing buyers, you can't say that your services are free. My services have never been free, really, on anything.
Yeah.
But, apparently, there's people out there saying that they're representing people for free, and in reality, they were receiving compensation for their work. And you can't filter listings based on offer of commissions. Like Eddie was saying earlier, I can't only show clients people who are offering top commission. Like, our job is to show you the market, and you select what you want to go see. You can continue to negotiate with clients, agree to offset commissions based on purchase negotiations and seller concessions. And you can agree with clients to seek sellers willing to negotiate to assist with those closing costs. Because obviously, if you know you got to have that money, those are the houses we have to tour that are offering that money. And you can include in purchase offer request for credit towards buyer agreed buyer's rep fees, meaning those set closing costs that are offered or concessions that are offered in the listing go directly to the buyer, and it is the buyer's responsibility to use those as they see fit, whether that be paying their agent, paying those closing costs, title fees, lender fees, all of that. So we hit a lot of information, but like we said, there is a kind of a screaming theme of this. If we put anything in bold, all things are negotiable always. Make sure you're working with a trusted professional. We hope to be those professionals for you. Any closing comments, Eddie?
I think that's about it. Hopefully we've at least summarized it a little bit, but obviously we'll have all our contact information on here. But if you have any other questions, and if you're a realtor out there and you have questions that maybe your brokerage hasn't gone over, or you're not sure you quite understand everything, please reach out. We'd love to help any way that we can.
Always here to assist. Thank you, guys. Thanks for watching.